Abu Obeida, the elusive leader of the Mustafa brigades, had been thought dead, his name a ghost in the annals of Israeli intelligence. But when he resurfaced with a chilling new message, it wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration of war. And as his ghost battalion unleashed a series of devastating attacks, Israeli defense officer Doron Schechter and military engineer Dr. Hanan Elbaz, both once trusted allies in the fight against terror, found themselves entwined in a conspiracy that would shake the foundations of their country. With betrayal lurking within their own ranks, the line between enemy and ally blurred, and a race against time began to uncover the shadow network rising from the ashes of a war Israel thought it had already won. On an otherwise uneventful Tuesday evening, television screens across Israel flickered and went dark for a moment. Then, without warning, a grainy, low-resolution video began streaming online, first on obscure forums, then spreading rapidly to encrypted messaging apps. Before long, it reached mainstream news outlets. The video was simple in structure, but its impact was immediate and chilling. Against a dark background, a masked man sat stiffly in front of a faded red flag. His eyes were hidden behind the black cloth wrapped tightly around his face, but his voice cut through with unmistakable sharpness, deep, steady, and cold. It was a voice many had not heard in over a decade, yet those who remembered it knew it well. Abu Obeida. For years, Abu Obeida was considered either dead or permanently in hiding after the dismantling of the militant Mustafa brigades in 2012. Israeli intelligence had written him off as a relic of a closed case, a ghost who had faded with his cause. But now, he had returned, and with him, an old fear came surging back. The video lasted less than 2 minutes. In it, Abu Obeida declared that the Mustafa brigades were not defeated, only reborn. He spoke of betrayal, of revenge, and of a reckoning that was already underway. Behind him, brief flashes of footage were spliced in, men training in the desert at night, assembling weapons with frightening precision, and marching in small, highly organized formations. Most alarming was the final shot, a missile launcher, being covered by a camouflaged net, its design unfamiliar to defense analysts. The video's production was rough, but the message was deliberate. This wasn't a recruitment tool or propaganda clip, it was a warning. Within hours, Israeli security services went on high alert. Cyber units traced the upload to multiple rerouted servers, eventually hitting a dead end somewhere in Southeast Asia. The Ministry of Defense convened an emergency session. Journalists scrambled to gather background on Abu Obeida. But there was little to go on. His last confirmed appearance was in 2012, during the final days of the Gaza conflict that year. What haunted officials the most was not just his reappearance, but the group he claimed had returned with him. The Mustafa brigades had been thought destroyed, wiped out in a targeted campaign of arrests and drone strikes. Now it seemed that the past wasn't buried, it had just been waiting. In 2012, the Mustafa brigades were a name that kept Israeli defense officials awake at night. Formed from a breakaway faction of Hamas, they operated with a chilling level of precision and discipline. Unlike other militant groups in Gaza, the brigades didn't rely on random rocket attacks or symbolic gestures. Their strikes were calculated, strategic, and often devastating. They targeted intelligence officers, supply lines, and military convoys with alarming accuracy. Their operations were small-scale, but carried enormous psychological impact. At the time, the group was seen as more of a tactical nightmare than a large-scale military threat, until they orchestrated the bombing of a bus in central Tel Aviv, killing 9 and injuring dozens. That attack shifted everything. In response, Israeli intelligence initiated Operation Silent Flame, a secret high-stakes campaign that aimed to dismantle the Mustafa brigades entirely. Over several months, elite units carried out targeted assassinations, infiltrated networks, and shut down arms supplies. Surveillance drones patrolled the skies non-stop. Communications between cells were intercepted and rerouted. One by one, commanders were eliminated or captured. Safe houses were exposed and destroyed. By the end of the operation, the brigades were declared neutralized. Their insignias vanished. Their leadership was either dead or in prison. and their remaining fighters had seemingly scattered or defected. Silent Flame was filed away as a textbook success, a rare clean victory in the long and murky war on terror. Now, with Abu Obeida's reappearance and his mention of the Mustafa Brigade's return, that victory is under scrutiny. If they were truly eliminated, how could they have re-emerged so suddenly and with such force? This wasn't a case of a new group adopting an old name. The footage from the recent video matched archival images from 2012. The flags, the formations, even the coded language used in the statement, all were unmistakably original. It raised one terrifying possibility, that Operation Silent Flame never finished its job. More questions began to surface. Had there been survivors who escaped undetected? Was someone within the operation feeding information to the enemy? Intelligence officers revisited old files, re-interviewed sources, and re-examined aerial footage from that year. Buried in a classified after-action report was one line that now stood out like a warning flare. One unit possibly unaccounted for. No confirmation of capture or kill. In 2012, that sentence was overlooked. In 2025, it felt like a prophecy fulfilled. Just 72 hours after the release of Abu Obeida's video, disaster struck. In the early hours before dawn, a missile tore through the stillness of Ashkelon. The target was shocking, a regional hospital's administrative wing. Though the missile struck before the building reached peak occupancy, it still killed 3 staff members and wounded 15 others. The structural damage was severe, but what truly rattled officials was the accuracy. The missile didn't just hit a building, it struck a specific room, one that housed digital records for patients connected to military personnel. Initial assessment suggested it was a freak chance, but once the debris was analyzed, doubts turned to dread. The fragments revealed a weapon unlike any seen in recent Gaza conflicts. The missile bore hallmarks of both foreign and domestic design. Its casing matched an old Iranian shell, but its guidance system, compact, modern, eerily advanced, matched nothing familiar. When defense analysts reviewed the internal components, they were stunned. The core was a custom-built navigation module, one that had been in development years ago as part of a shelved Israeli drone project. That prototype had never reached production and was supposedly destroyed along with the program. The implications were impossible to ignore. Someone had taken classified Israeli military technology and integrated it into enemy hands, and they had done it with surgical precision. For the public, the Ashkelon bombing was a national tragedy. For intelligence services, it was confirmation of their worst fears. The Mustafa Brigades were not just back, they were smarter, faster, and better equipped than before. The attack signaled a massive leap in capability. These weren't the crude rockets of previous years. This was coordinated warfare, executed with chilling intent. Surveillance was immediately intensified across the Gaza border, and checkpoints were reinforced. But the enemy left no trace. No group officially claimed responsibility, yet behind closed doors, military insiders knew. The timing, the style, and the message aligned perfectly with the resurgence of the brigades. Abu Obeida's promise hadn't been empty, it had been a warning. As investigators scoured footage, one detail chilled them further. The missile's trajectory suggested a mobile launch from an underground position just outside the city, far beyond where any previous tunnels were believed to reach. The shadows were shifting, and the enemy had already moved in closer than anyone imagined. In the wake of the Ashkelon bombing, Israeli intelligence agencies launched a full-scale internal review. Every military operation, every secure system, and every classified project from the past decade was put under the microscope. It didn't take long for one name to surface, a name that had quietly vanished years ago and was barely remembered, even among seasoned analysts, Doron Schechter. He was a cyber intelligence officer assigned to a classified branch of the 2012 operation that targeted the Mustafa Brigades. Brilliant, reclusive, and young, Schechter had been responsible for intercepting and decoding communications between militant cells. He had access to sensitive technology, tactical files, and experimental weapons data. According to records, Schechter had taken an unsanctioned leave just 6 months after Operation Silent Flame concluded. Official reports listed him as AWOL, presumed to have suffered a psychological breakdown. A minor internal investigation was conducted at the time, but with no evidence of treason and no trace of his whereabouts, the case was quietly closed. It was easier to label him as another burnout from the exhausting pressures of war. But now his profile was being re-examined with a different lens. Files showed he had been one of only 3 people with clearance to a discontinued drone navigation project, the same technology believed to be embedded in the Ashkelon missile. He had attended the last prototype test before the project was shelved. There was no record of him returning the access keys to the encrypted data drive. Agents began tracing his digital footprint. Though his online presence had gone dark years ago, fragments of activity emerged. Old accounts resurfaced, briefly activated through VPNs in South America and Eastern Europe. More alarmingly, security logs from a defense contractor showed a remote login attempt 3 years after his disappearance, flagged and dismissed as a system error at the time. Schechter had defected. It raised impossible questions. Had he been working with the Mustafa brigades all along, or had he been turned after the operation? Either scenario pointed to a terrifying truth. Someone who had once helped dismantle the brigades may have helped rebuild them from the inside out. For the first time, Israel faced the reality that the enemy wasn't just rising in Gaza's tunnels or hiding in foreign training camps. The roots of this resurgence could be buried deep within their own system, planted by a man they had trained, trusted, and then forgotten. As the search for answers deepened, aerial surveillance over Gaza began to reveal something unexpected. Beneath the surface of familiar neighborhoods and agricultural fields, engineers and analysts detected a vast new network of underground tunnels, more extensive and more sophisticated than anything previously recorded. These tunnels weren't simple smuggling paths or escape routes. They were reinforced with advanced materials, featured hidden ventilation systems, and included chambers large enough to store missiles, vehicles, and even small command centers. The construction was not only recent, it was also clearly funded by sources far beyond the region. Financial investigators began tracking the flow of money connected to materials found at the tunnel sites. What they uncovered painted a disturbing picture. Funds had been funneled through legitimate businesses in countries like Malaysia, Turkey, and Venezuela, disguised as donations to humanitarian causes or development projects. From there, the money quietly made its way to Gaza in the form of construction equipment, medical shipments, and agricultural supplies. Hidden within these deliveries were high-grade steel, fiber optic cables, encrypted communications gear, and specialized machinery. Everything needed to build a high-tech subterranean fortress. This discovery shifted the focus from local militant cells to a broader international network. It was clear now that the Mustafa brigades weren't operating in isolation. They had support, infrastructure, and logistics assistance stretching across continents. Somewhere along the way, their ideology had become marketable to foreign sponsors, groups, and individuals with their own reasons for destabilizing the region. Israeli analysts began reviewing intercepted communications in multiple languages. Embedded within ordinary exchanges were encrypted messages, coordinating shipments, signaling movement, and identifying targets. The level of coordination suggested not only outside help, but also the existence of a global command structure, far more complex than anyone had expected. This wasn't just a rebirth of the Mustafa brigades. It was their evolution into something far more dangerous. What frightened intelligence officials most was that this network had formed in plain sight. While global attention focused on other crises and conflicts, the brigades had used the shadows to rebuild. By the time they re-emerged, they weren't crawling out of hiding. They were stepping into a war they had carefully prepared for. The resurgence was no longer just a military threat. It had become an international web of finance, strategy, and influence. And it was growing stronger by the day. As investigators pieced together the growing web of evidence, one detail became impossible to ignore. The man at the center of it all had not just returned, he had evolved. Abu Obeida was no longer simply a masked spokesperson or battlefield commander. His latest message released on a dark web channel just 2 weeks after the Ashkelon attack, showed him standing before a row of masked soldiers, clad in black tactical gear, their faces hidden, but their posture rigid, rehearsed, professional. This wasn't a ragtag militia. This was something else. Voice recognition software confirmed the speaker was indeed the same man from 2012. It had always been suspected that Abu Obeida was a title passed down or shared among leaders, but analysis confirmed a match in vocal tone, speech rhythm, and linguistic patterning. Somehow, after escaping near certain death in a drone strike over a decade ago, the original Abu Obeida had survived, vanished, and returned more powerful than ever. What disturbed analysts most was not just his survival, but what he had become. His rhetoric had changed. No longer focused solely on revenge or resistance, he spoke in terms of strategy, global injustice, and retribution rooted in ideology. He referenced conflicts from regions far outside Gaza, hinting at coordination with foreign movements and aligning himself with broader causes. His influence was clearly expanding beyond Palestine. Intelligence agencies began to suspect that Abu Obeida was not just rebuilding the Mustafa brigades, he was transforming them into the nucleus of a new transnational militant alliance. Further analysis of the latest video showed hints of foreign fighters in the background, small tells like non-Arabic gestures, distinct patches on gear, and a variety of weapon models rarely seen in Gaza. If true, it meant Abu Obeida had managed to recruit far beyond his original base. He was no longer just a local threat. He was an emerging global figure in underground warfare. What puzzled officials most was how he had stayed hidden for so long. Interrogations of captured operatives yielded the same phrase repeatedly: "He is everywhere and nowhere." Rumors circulated that he had spent years in Iran, or Syria, or even among rebel groups in Africa. No one knew for certain. But what was clear now was that Abu Obeida was not a ghost from the past. He was the architect of the future. And he had returned with a vision, not just for resistance, but for dominance. As the investigation widened, a new discovery brought the crisis into an even more alarming light. During a joint IDF and Shin Bet raid on the outskirts of Khan Yunis, a tunnel collapse revealed a hidden chamber buried deep beneath a residential neighborhood. Inside, soldiers found crates of weapons stacked with almost clinical precision. Everything, from assault rifles to high-grade explosives. But it wasn't the quantity that raised alarms. It was the origin. Several of the weapons were Israeli-made, serial numbers etched into the metal-matched stock from a 2014 seizure, part of a covert arms shipment intercepted by naval forces off the Mediterranean coast. Those weapons had been catalogued, secured, and eventually listed as destroyed in a controlled demolition 2 years later. But the ones now in Gaza were intact, fully functional, and in perfect condition. It didn't make sense unless someone on the inside had diverted them before they were ever destroyed. This revelation sent shockwaves through the military chain of command. An internal leak at this level meant more than just corruption. It meant collaboration. Someone within Israel's own defense infrastructure had supplied advanced weaponry to a group committed to its destruction, and they had done so without leaving a trace for nearly a decade. Further forensic analysis revealed even more unsettling details. Modified targeting scopes and advanced battery packs found in the cache had been part of a classified development project discontinued in 2015. The project files were sealed, and only a few senior engineers and intelligence officers had access. Investigators now suspected that either the technology had been stolen by someone with direct access, or worse, willingly handed over. Security services began reviewing logs, security footage, and personnel files from the last 10 years. Every missing shipment, every accidental misplacement, every quiet resignation was being re-examined. But the deeper they dug, the more it became clear that this wasn't a one-time breach. It was systematic. The presence of Israeli weapons in a Mustafa Brigade's tunnel was more than just a tactical problem. It was symbolic. The group was now turning the country's own creations against it, both technologically and psychologically. The weapons weren't just tools of destruction. They were a message. Israel's defenses had been compromised, not by force, but by infiltration. The enemy hadn't broken in. Someone had let them in. As Israeli intelligence tightened its focus on the internal threat, one name began to emerge with increasing frequency: Dr. Hanan Elbaz. Once a brilliant engineer working with Israel's Ministry of Defense, Elbaz had specialized in the development of cutting-edge military technology, particularly in the field of drone navigation and communication systems. Known for her quiet demeanor and relentless work ethic, she had been regarded as one of the country's top defense minds. But her disappearance in 2017 was a mystery that had never been fully resolved. Officially, she was considered missing, presumed dead, after a routine research trip to Europe turned into a vanishing act. No ransom note, no body, no trace. The investigation was closed with the assumption that Elbaz had either fled the country or met with foul play abroad. What made her resurfacing even more disturbing was the discovery that her fingerprints had been found on several components from the missile used in the Ashkelon bombing. Not just any components, these were part of a new guidance system, a highly sophisticated module that only a handful of engineers had the knowledge and clearance to develop. These modules were not commercially available, and their design had been proprietary to a classified Israeli project that Elbaz had worked on years before her disappearance. Digging through old files, intelligence officers uncovered a chilling pattern. Elbaz had been responsible for a subset of technologies that could have allowed her to bypass standard security protocols. This wasn't just a matter of someone replicating her work. She had the capability to modify, alter, and improve the very systems that Israel had thought secure. It became increasingly clear that Elbaz had likely defected or been co-opted during her time away. What began as a theoretical threat now felt like a deliberate betrayal. In the years since her disappearance, Elbaz had quietly engineered a silent rebellion. Through clandestine contacts, she had passed on her knowledge to adversaries, first to regional arms dealers and eventually to factions like the Mustafa Brigades. Her expertise, coupled with access to Israeli military technology, gave the brigades the tools to significantly escalate their operations. As agents delved deeper into Elbaz's network, it became apparent that she hadn't just been a passive participant in this growing web of insurgency. She had become one of its central figures. From underground labs to international meetings in obscure locations, Dr. Elbaz had built a network of loyalists and sympathizers, all of whom were waiting for the right moment to unleash the fruits of her treason. And that moment, it seemed, had arrived. As the pieces of the puzzle slowly came together, a terrifying new element emerged: the creation of a special unit within the Mustafa Brigades, one that operated with a chilling level of precision and secrecy. Intelligence agencies began to hear whispers of a ghost battalion, a shadowy force that was rumored to be the tip of the spear in the brigade's resurgence. This unit didn't operate like the standard militant cells scattered across Gaza. The Ghost Battalion was different, smaller, quieter, and more lethal. The first signs of their existence appeared in the aftermath of a string of high-profile attacks. Over the course of just a few days, 5 separate Israeli targets were hit with surgical precision: a military outpost in the Negev desert, a border control station in Eilat, an energy facility near Ashdod, a communications hub in Tel Aviv, and a remote weapons depot in the West Bank. Each attack was carried out with such coordination and exact timing that it was clear the operatives involved had undergone extensive training. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew how to do it without leaving any trace. Footage recovered from security cameras at the sites revealed little. The attackers were always masked, dressed in nondescript clothing, and used advanced, untraceable weapons. In one case, an explosive device was detonated with such precision that it bypassed several layers of security, detonating only once it reached the core of the target. There were no signs of struggle or chaos, just quiet efficiency. As intelligence agencies analyzed the attacks further, they began to see a disturbing pattern. Each operation seemed to be linked to one key trait: the attacker's ability to blend in. They didn't use traditional militant tactics or vehicles. Instead, they moved like ghosts, slipping through security with the ease of professionals who had trained for years to be invisible. They weren't operating out of the usual militant strongholds. They were scattered, hidden, dispersed in small, isolated cells, each one operating independently, yet all connected by an unseen hand. Israeli analysts began to piece together reports from field operatives who suggested that this unit was different from anything they had ever encountered. The Ghost Battalion had no discernible command structure. It was more like a network of individuals, each trained to operate alone in complete silence, without ever contacting one another directly. It was as if the attackers were mere ghosts in the system, present for a fleeting moment, then gone, without a trace. The attacks were quick and deliberate, and the operatives left no identifiable patterns that could be traced back to them. It was as if they had mastered the art of anonymity to a degree previously thought impossible. This discovery sent shockwaves through the Israeli defense establishment. For the first time, they were facing an adversary who didn't just rely on traditional methods of warfare. They were fighting an enemy that had learned how to erase itself from existence, leaving nothing behind but the haunting aftermath of their precision strikes. And with the Ghost Battalion now active, the stakes had never been higher. The Mustafa brigades weren't just back, they had evolved into something far more terrifying. As Israeli intelligence scrambled to understand the true scale of the threat, a chilling realization set in. The clock was ticking. With each new attack, the Ghost Battalion's influence grew, and the pressure on Israel's military and intelligence agencies mounted. The days of quiet surveillance and analysis were over. The Mustafa brigades were no longer just a rogue group operating out of Gaza. They had become an organized international force capable of striking anywhere, at any time. The world had underestimated them once before, and now they were paying the price for that mistake. In a high-level emergency briefing, Israeli officials discussed their next steps. Military leaders expressed concerns over the possibility of a full-scale conflict breaking out. They were aware that the brigade's growing sophistication, combined with their new international connections, meant they could easily escalate their attacks to include more advanced weaponry and more widespread destruction.